Welcome to this month's episode of the PA Path. We would like to give a big thanks to this month's podcast supporter, the University of Pittsburgh School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences Doctor of Medical Science program. I'm delighted to have Kelli Hutchens as our guest. Kelli is a senior academic advisor at the University of Mississippi in the Health Professions Advising Office. She is also the National Association of Advisors for the Health Professions Ambassador to PAEA and co-chair of the Southeastern Association of Advisors for the Health Professions Virtual Engagement Committee. Kelli also served for 3 years as a board member for the Southeastern Association of Advisors for the Health Professions. This is Kelli's 14th year in the health professions advising realm, and at Ole Miss, she primarily advises pre-med and pre-PA juniors and seniors. Kelli, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm absolutely just looking forward to a conversation, just really hearing all things about the PA pathway from your perspective. And you have a very interesting background and work that you do with the PA pathway and working with pre-PA students. You've been doing this for a number of years at a variety of spaces. But one thing that's very interesting to me that I've learned about is this, and won't get it 100% right, a pre-PA course that you offer. Can you talk to us just a little bit about that before we get into some of the meat, more of what the PA pathway looks like?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Emma. So that class is called LIBA 303, and it is a class that I originally created for pre-medical students who were getting ready to apply to medical school. That was in 2019 that I created it, and I sort of just taught it to try it out and see how it went with some input, especially from Marion Denham from Alabama, from our med school. And as I taught it over a couple of years, it evolved, especially with COVID, and it became online asynchronous. But one of the things that I saw value in would be teaching it with PA students, because I find that one of the most challenging things about being pre-PA is that schools are so different and timelines are so different and CASPA is so different. And so with that in mind, a couple of years ago, I started teaching a pre-PA applicant class. Our pre-PA population at University of Mississippi has just exploded. And I think that's probably true throughout the country, but especially at our institution. Our pre-PA society was formed in 2020. And with that, more and more students are becoming interested in the pre-PA profession. So in this class, I go through everything I think they need to know from start to end about being a PA applicant. So we try to assess their strengths and weaknesses. We talk about CASPA. We actually write. I make them do a lot of free writing in the class to understand what goes into writing a good experience or activity in CASPA, what to include in CASPA. We talk about test taking, so the GRE, the CASPER exam, the PA CAT, if that's applicable for the few students it's applicable for, and basically how to figure out what PA schools you're going to apply to and what your timeline should be for doing all of these things. So it's a 1 hour a week asynchronous online class, and I pre-record the lectures, and the assignments for the class are things like writing an experience in CASPA that then you have peer reviewed and get feedback on. And then from there, once you understand what a good experience or activity looks like, writing 10 more activities, drafting your personal statement, drafting your study timeline if you haven't already taken your exam, and drafting your admissions timeline. So it's, I think, 78% of the students who took the class last spring who ended up applying got into PA school. So that was exciting, given that I think the national rate was 31%. So yeah, I feel like it's been a great success.
I just love that. And it sounds like pre-PA students are getting some real experience going through the process, some good feedback that, of course, we all know is necessary when you're going through this process. So keeping the course that you've designed in mind, keeping, the many students that you're reaching through this course, how would you describe the PA pathway right now from your perspective, your experience, and what you're seeing with your students? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I really think the PA pathway varies greatly between students. So, in other words, I don't think there's any one pathway to the PA profession. With that being said, students decide they're interested in the PA profession, I have found, anywhere between middle to high school, all the way through after they graduate from college. And there are certain things that I sort of recommend depending on where they are in the process. So there are certain prerequisite courses they have to have, which varies somewhat by school, but PAEA has a good list of the core requirements for most schools to start with. And normally they can incorporate those courses within their degree plan. You could be any major and go to PA school, but you need to have a strong GPA, especially science GPA, to show your readiness. And one of the things that's especially important for PA school, in addition to shadowing, which I feel like you need for most health professions, you need hands-on patient care to be competitive for most PA schools. That can be particularly challenging for my first generation and underrepresented students. I myself was a first generation student. I didn't have anybody in the medical realm, and it can be really overwhelming and daunting to try to find somebody to shadow. And especially when you look at last year, the number of patient care hours for students who were accepted to PA school was well above 2,000. But with that being said, I tell my students that they need a minimum of 500 hours for most schools to be competitive for an interview, more like 1,000 to be highly competitive, that shadowing is important, and that they need to just start wherever they can. So if they can't get in with a PA to shadow, but they can get in with a PA or a physician, great, go ahead. If they can't get a super hands-on patient care job to begin with, but they can get a job as a pharmacy technician or whatever they can get, to go ahead and start there and to use that networking they're getting during shadowing to try to find that patient care. Students fill out the CASPA, which is like a common application for PA schools. That application is fairly extensive and it takes a lot more time than most students realize to really write and formulate a competitive application. So schools are looking at grades and test scores, but they're also really looking at that patient care, volunteering, involvement, leadership, all of those things. And they don't just want to know what you've done and how many hours, but how it impacted you and how you grew from it. And the last thing I'll say is students interview for PA school between July and March, normally, approximately, and start PA school, if accepted, between January and October. Most PA programs are between 27 and 33 months long. And after they get through a PA program, they sit for the PANCE exam to become fully fledged PAs and work in a variety of settings and specialties after they graduate.
Well, it's no easy one size fits all thing here, but it sounds like you definitely work with your students in a way to help them understand the many ways, of course, particularly, I love that you can have a variety of majors and still end up in the PA profession. And also you found a way to really highlight how the diversity of programs, but still help students to kind of navigate that space to get into school. So I really appreciate you highlighting all of that. Kelli, when you think back to, all of your experiences, the many students that you've worked with, can you give us some examples of things that our audience might not realize about the PA pathway that you've encountered on a regular basis just in your years of doing this work?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Emma. I sincerely believe the biggest barrier to PA school is not just the prerequisites and the patient care hours. Those are difficult. But honestly, the variance in timeline by schools in how that confuses students. So PA schools have, I believe, 7 different start dates and a number of different deadline dates. Some schools are rolling, which means the earlier you apply, generally the better your chance of getting an interview and acceptance, where others are non-rolling, which means they don't have to look at the applications until the deadline and there's not an advantage to applying earlier. So, research has found that students should apply to 7 or more schools to have the best chance of gaining admission to PA school. That's a statistical finding. But the challenge is that a student may pick 7 schools that all have distinctly different timelines. And then that student needs to make a decision on when they should submit their application based on those schools. So, what many students don't realize is that after you submit your CASPA application, you can't update the patient care hours for an existing physician or an existing entry or activity that you already have in the CASPA application. So if you're working as a medical assistant and you have 500 hours and then you get 200 more, even if a program is non-rolling and later, you can't go in and update that directly in the CASPA. Some schools do allow you to send them updated hours periodically through a portal or through an admissions email, but you need to be competitive for most schools at the time of application. So if it's okay with you to give an example, this happened just the other day. I'm working with a student who's from Georgia right now, and she's interested in applying to several schools, both in her home state, but then around, primarily in the South. And just to give you some little anecdotes as we were talking through, one of the schools that she's most interested in, they don't have a GRE requirement, which is great. They require 1,000 hours of patient care by the time of application. And even though the CASPA application itself opens in late April, this school doesn't open their application in CASPA until October. And their deadline isn't until April, but they're rolling and they are accepting applications and interviewing right now. So the students who are applying right now for their program are students who want to enter January of 2026. So that's very confusing for a student because most January start programs, for instance, there's another school that's also in her state, and they do require a GRE, which she hasn't taken yet, so she couldn't apply. But this program is rolling and they are accepting applications. I think their deadline was August 1st, and they start this coming January of 2025. And then just to give another example from that region that she's looking at, she's applying to a couple of schools, one that's an August deadline and one that's an October deadline, and they are both actually non-rolling. So if those were her two first choice, she'd probably want to wait until mid-July to submit. She's still met the deadline, but so that her hours were the highest they could be by the time they received her application, or even for the October start, if that was her top choice, she might even want to wait till later. But if she wants to apply to all these other schools, she's going to have to reconsider that timeline and maybe even apply during two application cycles, this current one and next one. So just all that to say that for a lot of students, I don't think they realize these varied timelines. And I think honestly, that's probably why the acceptance rate to PA schools are so low, not because we don't have really good applicants, because I think we do, but because of these varied timelines, it's really hard to wrap your head around when to apply and what schools you should apply to be most competitive.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And for you to give that example of, how a student might be applying locally, all things considered, and what that might look like for them. And it sounds like, particularly for your students, that they are able to have some assistance with what that timeline and what some of that might look like. Let's take a quick break for a word from this month's episode supporter, the University of Pittsburgh School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences Doctor of Medical Science program. Influence the PA profession by joining an educational program that focuses on quality improvement in your practice. The University of Pittsburgh offers a 1-year, 100% online Doctor of Medical Science program for practicing PAs looking for that next step. With 3 start dates available in January, May, and August, you can feel confident in selecting a program that offers you the most flexibility for your life and career. See what's possible at Pitt. Reach out to an enrollment specialist today at www.shrs.pitt.edu/DMSC. So, in addition to what you just mentioned, what are some things in your experience that you've seen change in the admissions process over the past 3 years? And I think, sometimes we think about a pre-COVID and post-COVID era. What are some things that are just a little bit different during the process?
Yeah, so first I would say that interest in PA has just exploded. And I think this is true generally throughout the country, but in my opinion, I worked at Penn State previously, so I had primarily been in the Northeast. I think the state of Pennsylvania had, 20 PA schools when I moved to Mississippi. And really nobody had heard of PA or hardly anybody when I first got onto our campus, and that was 2018. And Oxford's a tiny college town, and it was dominated by nurse practitioners, but it seems like there's more and more PAs who are practicing and more interest in becoming a PA for these students. So that's the first thing I would say that I've noticed. I think shadowing and clinical experiences have become harder for many, if not most students, but I especially see this as being true for my first generation college students and those lacking direct connections to healthcare. I think COVID made everything lock down a little bit more. And for those students who don't already have those connections to facilitate the shadowing, the hands-on patient care, and those sorts of things, it takes them a lot longer to find those experiences, and it's just harder. Also, there are so many more PA schools to choose from than there used to be, and I have no idea if this is just me noticing it now or if it's something that has changed or if it's been like this forever, but I feel like more and more PA schools have different ways that they're doing admissions. So, like holistic admissions is something that's thrown around, and I think many PA schools try to look at their applicants holistically. But the more I hear from PA schools, the more I feel like they're kind of taking different approaches to that for students. And again, that could be just coming from my perspective. But in the last 10 years, I feel like there's more and more variety in that realm.
No, I appreciate that, and that you brought up holistic admission. It is something that many of our programs do take advantage of, and it does look different, for each program, which, in some ways, of course, will give, students an advantage, and then again, going back to your example for a student who may be applying to multiple schools, a little bit more processing to kind of figure out, what it is that each school needs. So, no, definitely unique challenges that pre-PA students might face. So, Kelly, I started out with saying, you've been doing this work for a long time in various areas and, of course, focusing on the PA space. If you could leave this audience with just the best words of advice as they're going through this process, what would it be?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's a great question. I think for the students who are interested in pre-PA, my first piece of advice would be get started early. And not only get started early, but make sure that you're tracking everything early. So I like mappd.com, mappd.com, because you can create a free account on there and sort of track everything from your shadowing to your clinical hours to your grades to your involvement all in one place. But I think it's really important to get started early. If you are a high school student who's interested in this, I know some people are fortunate enough to have those health exploration type programs in high school. I would say get certified if you can. If you have the opportunity to get certified as a CNA or an EMT or a phlebotomist or whatever it is, getting that early experience, I think, is really helpful in making sure this is what you want to do, getting the full realm of healthcare exposure, and just getting started early on those hours. And I would say for my students, shadowing is the best way to start. So the PA application process is really overwhelming, but my best advice is to start by shadowing. Even if a person can't let you shadow, their practice doesn't allow it, see if they're willing to have coffee with you or do a phone conversation and just starting to make those connections, ask them about, especially if they're a PA, where did they get their direct patient care hours, or do they have any connections or thoughts? Again, I was a first generation college student, and neither of my parents were in healthcare. But if I think about, and I always use this example with my students, my parents' connections. So we went to church when we were younger, but also my mom is part of this quilt club. And I mean, I swear, these ladies, I feel like they have a connection to the president of the United States if you really need it. So just using the connections that you have, even if they don't seem relevant, to try to get some of that shadowing and patient contact, I think is a really good thing. One thing I would say for my applicants is don't stop once you submit your application. So don't stop working, doing things, because it's very likely that you may need to do an update, or you could end up being a reapplicant, or you could decide to add schools. So don't stop doing things and work with your advisor. So if you have a PA advisor, that's going to be your best opportunity to kind of figure this out. And then to answer your question from a program director or a PA program perspective, I think that I would tell PA program directors, it really does impact students to have these different timelines and requirements, especially underrepresented students, which I know PA is really trying to increase our diversity in the profession. It's really hard to wrap your head around all of that when you are a first generation college student or whatever. So just kind of going in with that understanding. Don't assume that all PA schools are like yours, because y'all really do differ so much. Every PA school really is so different. And then one idea or thought I had is maybe creating alumni networks who allow shadowing for pre-PA students, because I feel like since that is one of the biggest barriers, if you're really trying to diversify the field and get more people prepared, to be competitive applicants to your programs, if you can give resources like, well, we have these alumni who are in your area who might be willing to let you shadow, that would be huge in opening that doorway for more students.
Wonderful words. I love the alumni sharing, and we talk about mentoring and the impact of that. Or like you mentioned, just have a cup of coffee with someone, that goes a very, very long way. So thank you, Kelli, so much for just sharing your time with us, your experience, and just leaving some nuggets for our pre-PA students and PA faculty and program directors. I know that it's helpful and gives folks a little bit to think about as we move forward and do our best to just recruit the best and the brightest for the PA profession. So thank you so much. And I've absolutely enjoyed sharing time with you today.
Thank you so much, Emma. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope we get lots of great PAs in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us today, Kelli, and thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of the PA Path. We would like to give thanks again to this month's episode supporter, the University of Pittsburgh School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences Doctor of Medical Science program. For more information, visit them online at www.shrs.pitt.edu/DMSC. Before we go, I'd like to highlight the PAEA resource of the episode, which is the Recruitment and Outreach Toolkit. We invite you to download and share the toolkit materials at your future recruitment events, in your offices or online, to help prospective PAs along their pathways to the profession. Join us each month as we speak with leaders in our profession across the country.